So yes, welcome everybody. This is our event, StopWaste event, a conversation with environmental justice leaders in the Bay. We have, I think, a great panel of different local organizations and environmental justice leaders to speak with us about what environmental justice means, the current environmental justice initiatives in the Bay Area, and how you can get involved in this work. So I would like to welcome Jessie Clements from the Berkeley Student Food Collective, Juan Bernal from Grid Alternatives, Gabby from UC Berkeley's Student Environmental Resource Center, and finally, Wanda Stewart from Common Vision. So we're going to start off today by having our panelists introduce themselves, telling us a little bit about the work that they're doing, and then we're going to jump into conversation. We're going to talk to these folks, see what they're up to, and see kind of what environmental justice means from a variety of perspectives and fields. So Wanda, would you get us started?
Surely. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure. By the way, my Zoom bomber here is Jonas. He'll come and go during the course of my presentation for sure. I am an urban farmer. I'm a Black woman. I live in South Berkeley and Stewart Land in primarily West Oakland, but also in schools in and around the Bay Area. All under the guise of being the executive director of Common Vision. Please, I am so sorry. And it's interesting. Sai said, well, what does environmental justice mean to you? And I would have to be honest in saying that it didn't mean a whole lot to me in a tangible way until I started working in West Oakland. Some years back, I was the executive director of People's Grocery, and they were a food justice nonprofit. And while I knew that West Oakland was supposed to be a food desert, I didn't really know it with my own soul until the day I was driving down San Pablo, cross 40th, and realized I might not be able to get a lunch of food that I was willing to put into my body, right? Without having to get in my car again. Then I went, oh, aha, food justice, food deserts awareness. Kind of the same thing. After the People's Grocery experience, I kind of retreated to a nice little plot of land on the corner of Brockhurst and West and 33rd Street. And I started growing Hoover Elementary's garden with the students there. And 5-6 years later, it's a remarkable food forest with chickens, with a pond that in nature's way populated itself with frogs, right? Go figure that. With monarch butterflies flying through the air like jet planes in plentiful numbers. And watching the Hoover Elementary School children learn to experience themselves as part of its natural ecosystem, right? Instead of either being unaware of nature in that way or feeling that nature is at their beck and call, taught me about environmental justice. And that we can't expect people of color, people who are disenfranchised, folks who deal and live with less, and on surfaces that are poisoned and hardened with concrete, to understand and appreciate the environment. It's not part of their world. So when we were able to insert real environment onto this playground, right? And teach the kids what that meant, and how, and more importantly, how that felt, right? I honestly began to at least understand how to put a frame around the need for environmental justice. So the quick story I would tell you about that, in my first year, there was a day where there was an explosion of caterpillar eggs. there were caterpillars of all sizes all over the garden. And I'm like, children, come see the caterpillars. And it was wonderful. And they played with them and they dared to touch them and let them crawl on them. And by the end of the day, you couldn't find a caterpillar anywhere in this garden, right? Like nowhere. 3 or 4 years later, with lots of study, with lots of observation, with lots of times with hands in their soil, the kids at Hoover Elementary will tell you that if you just watch the caterpillar, you'll learn a whole lot more about it than if you move it off the leaf it's eating. And if you leave them alone so that they can live and be healthy, and you watch, you can find chrysalises, you can go and observe them develop. And if you're really lucky, you can have one land on you and use its wings. Use your arm to dry its wings. And now I have a picture of exactly that. I'm sorry that I didn't put it in. But a young man named Joshua, who was very extremely ADHD with lots of developmental issues and delays, and had an impossible time sitting still in a seat, came out to the garden. And one butterfly decided that she was going to sit on his arm to dry out before it took off on its first flight. And it required Joshua to sit still for 10 minutes with all of his classmates sitting around him in a circle, thrilled and amazed at how important and special he was in nature, right? And that's where kids learn about how to be one with their environment. And then they can really get why it's so important, not just why to take care of the earth and themselves, but how to do it. In one more story, I had to tell the kids that I was going to miss school one day because I was going to Philadelphia to say goodbye to my father who was dying. And in the very back row, in the farthest corner, comes a voice that says, there goes that life cycle again, right? So when the work of helping these kids grow in the garden, themselves and the plants, they came to understand that life happens. And the bad part of it, you make compost out of it. And the best part of it, you celebrate. And it's really helpful to those kids in defining how they live their own lives that is so unpredictable, can be so awful, so violent, so crowded, so challenging, right? Like it is now for all of us today. There's a resilience that comes in that understanding of how to work with nature and the environment. So that is why I do the work I do. And that is why I'm helping to teach schools and school districts and different organizations how to use gardens to teach about life, right? How to grow food, how to grow people, how to build community, and how to manage the planet. And then parenthetically also, justice is everybody having an equal opportunity to thrive. And I know that that starts with good food, which is why I teach people to grow it, which is why my organization is delivering it to folks who have less access directly from farmers, which is why we're going into large food generators, taking their donations of their throwaway food and redistributing it and creating our school gardens as school hubs as a way to educate our children and safeguard our future. And I'm going to end right there.
Thank you so much, Wanda.
Yes. And Sai, I'll be right back.
Sounds good. Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, we have Gabby from UC Berkeley's Student Environmental Resource Center.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Sai and StopWaste, for having me tonight. And thank you to everybody in the space. Happy Friday night Friday, Saturday, depending on where you're joining us in the world. I'm super happy and grateful to be here. Yeah, as I was to introduce, my name is Gabby Mbayek. My pronouns are she, they. In addition to being the Environmental Justice Associate at CERC, I'm a third year at UC Berkeley studying molecular biology and minoring in global poverty and practice. So I'm here today to introduce CERC, but I suppose also in introducing myself, evaluating my own relationship with environmental justice, the answer to the question of how I got into it really centers on one word, and that is identity. Growing up, I grew up the daughter of immigrants from the Philippines. So second generation Filipino American. I grew up in Southern California, and living as a diasporic Filipino, there have always been many conversations about the personal and broad impacts of certain things such as industrialization, pollution on the Filipino masses. And so how I got into it was just listening to these oral stories and tales about my family's hometown, my family's ancestral lands, pre and post industrialization. And I'm a person who's very interested in learning about health disparities and bases of disease. So it was very intriguing for me as a child to learn about instances in my family of chronic asthma as a direct result of things such as industrialization, pollution from large corporations, hearing on the Philippine news about land degradation for corporate profit. And although I was about 8 years old at the time hearing about these things, and environmental justice wasn't an explicit term in my vocabulary, these things have always been in the back of my mind. And so when I came to UC Berkeley in 2018, I was very interested in nurturing that interest and really applying it to work. And so after a year of self-study on environmental justice and really evaluating that narrative, I began to work for the Student Environmental Resource Center, and I'm in my third year and I haven't looked back since. So what is CERC? Next slide, Sai. So to cap, the Student Environmental Resource Center at UC Berkeley is a space to collaboratively strengthen the collective effectiveness of the sustainability community and provide resources, that's in the name, right, for students to actualize their visions of a more equitable, socially just, and resilient future. And that's a beautiful picture of a student cohort from about a few years ago. A lot of them are alumnus now, working in the environmental sector and beyond. So yeah, effectively, we're a place for undergraduate and graduate students to come and to really create discourse and resources surrounding so many different facets of the environment, including zero waste, green technology, and environmental justice as one. Next slide. So a little bit about us. We were founded in 2012. And the department was founded by students and for students. We were founded by 3 wonderful transfer students who saw a need in the UC Berkeley community to really create a focus center on environmentalism and sustainability for students. And after grant applications and discussions, CERC was founded and given an official space in 2012. We are considered to be the central sustainability hub on the UC Berkeley campus. And so although we don't directly sponsor any student organizations, we are typically the landing ground for a lot of collaborations within our space. And pre-COVID, we sponsored a lot of events within our physical space on the UC Berkeley campus. We are entirely student-led and run, aside from our 2 full-time staffers, who are our CERC director and our grant manager, Sharon and Teresa, respectively. And that really fosters a lot of opportunity for student collaboration and reflection on all fronts of sustainability. And we also empower others to increase their education, leadership opportunities, and feelings of community amongst people who are interested in learning about the environment and sustainability. Next slide. We derive a lot of our values from a very specific story, the story of the hummingbird, which was cited by Wangari Maathai, a Nobel laureate writer and environmental policy activist, who quoted the story in the film Dirt. The story, to kind of summarize, essentially talks about large brush fire, which has the potential to destroy a lot of the natural forests as well as the entire ecosystems that live within it. And the hummingbird, being the smallest creature amongst all of the woodland animals, decides to pick up water using its beak in order to try and put out the brush fire. And while the hummingbird is doing that, it is being simultaneously taunted by other woodland creatures who are saying, "You are a hummingbird, you do not have the capacity to carry all of this water, so why are you still trying to put out the brush fire?" At which point the character says this biblical quote, "I will be a hummingbird, I will do the best I can." And we use that as like a focal point to really evaluate how, as a center, we do our best to support students to act as a center ground for environmental advocacy on the UC Berkeley campus. And we do the best and we try to make the largest impact in the most genuine impact we can, albeit even if it's sometimes small and more intimate. So yeah, we're guided by 5 values, or yeah, 5 values, which are on the next slide, which include, or next slide, please. Yes. Conscious impact, equity and inclusion, community engagement, student sovereignty, and bold imagination. And all of these really tie into the center of our environmental justice work and education that we do at the center. To provide a brief history of environmental justice at CERC. The Environmental Justice Associate position, which I currently occupy, was born in 2017. 2016, 2017, after a student-led advocacy campaign called #environmentalismsowhite. And it was done in response to the College of Natural Resources at UC Berkeley not addressing the lack of diversity within their teaching staff and faculty. And it was done in response to student calls for a more diverse, holistic perspective on that front. So as a side consequence of that, CERC added the Environmental Justice Associate position with the purpose of creating direct resources, collaborative materials, and external outreach specifically focused on environmental justice education. And so you kind of see that application of values there. And so next slide. And so speaking of student staff, this is just a brief overview of all of the folks who currently work at CERC. The Green Initiative Fund is the grant cycle that operates out of CERC. And if you find under internal operations, you'll see my name there. This just kind of shows like the breadth of work that we do. And especially as of recently, we have had many discussions as a center talking about environmental justice and how it can be integrated into every facet of sustainability work, not trying to take environmental justice and kind of designate it to its own small section, but to really critically evaluate as a group, as a team, and as a community, what is environmentalism with and without environmental justice, and how are the two interrelated in very critically important ways. Next slide. So one of the resources and one of the primary resources that we have on environmental justice is actually on our CERC website. We have an entire tab called Environmental Justice underneath the Resources tab, which is highlighted in green in the top right. And it houses articles, maps, environmental justice teaching and pedagogical toolkits, as well as a description of what environmental justice is. And it's frequently referenced by student organizations as like a starting point for their own evaluations of environmental justice and environmental justice programming. And one of the things that I do at the center is to update that, as well as act as consultant using this information towards student groups who may not have had that conversation yet about environmental justice in their work, but want to begin to, which is a great first step that we have seen more frequently in the past year. So next slide. Another thing that we do on the campus and that I do specifically is the facilitation of events that focus specifically on environmental justice. So within the past year, we've set up a lot of projects that we've used as opportunities to educate the community, both within the UC Berkeley student population, faculty, staff, and beyond, to external community members, specifically here in the East Bay. to talk about environmental justice. And we've covered a large amount of topics. There have been 3 environmental justice associates at CERC, including myself, and we all have had large opportunities to facilitate a bunch of different events, but some examples that we have are a workshop that we did last year talking about understanding and resisting the rise of ecofascism in response to COVID-19, the early COVID-19 pandemic. We've also set up a anti-racist eco bookworms book club for students to read a lot of political texts about environmental justice and to review those resources in community with each other. There's actually an event for that I'll plug later. But yeah, moving on from that, last semester we held a panel with leading experts on environmental displacement and the advent of climate refugees as environmental justice. And recently with Zoom, we've definitely expanded our reach to go more globally. So last month for the Students of Color Environmental Collective Conference, we co-facilitated an event called Environmental Justice in Indonesia, a panel in collaboration with SCEC and the Indonesian American community at UC Berkeley to talk about issues in their homelands as part of a series that I piloted about a year ago. So yeah, these are some of the examples of the things that we do. And I'd be happy to take any questions on that. I have one more slide that I would really like to plug here. And there are events that are happening year round at CERC, it seems like. And coincidentally, there is something that is happening tonight for our Earth Week. And that is a screening of the film A River Between Us, which talks about Indigenous land rights, I believe, around a specific river, as well as all of the issues and advocacy that's arisen out of that. I'll plug everything in the chat so that way y'all have the opportunity to register if you would like to come. It'll be happening at 8 p.m. tonight, PST. So with that, that is the overview of environmental justice work at CERC. What I'd like to reiterate about it is that it was born out of student advocacy, and it is currently being maintained by this very communal effort from a bunch of different folks, a bunch of different organizations, and a bunch of different parties to really maintain that momentum as we move into the future, not just as a campus community, or students within the campus community itself, but just as like people in general. And so that's me. Again, I'll take any questions, but if not, for the meantime, I'll throw it back to Sai. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, we'll do some questions at the end. Thank you so much, Gabby. We'll go ahead and we'll have Juan Bernal from Grid Alternatives. Go ahead and get us started. I'll get your slides up here.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Wanda. Hope everybody's doing pretty well. Yeah, I think, I totally spaced out that it was Earth Day week. One of those things where many of us celebrate it more than once a day or once a year, but it's always good to bring that back.
Sorry, give me 1 second. It's been a little slow.
No worries.
All right. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for putting this on. Yeah, I think initially, when I was approached by this, I always come from the perspective of I'm like, oh, am I the right person to speak on this? Especially being so passionate about environmental justice. So I'll do my best. I definitely add some parts at the end of other organizations that are also doing amazing environmental justice work. I think as an organization, Grid Alternatives does a lot of really awesome things, but I think internally, many of us are trying to always push forward to just get more equity and more, just more in general. But I'll probably go a little bit overview about, who Grid is in case you're not familiar with what we do, and just a little bit of the other barriers that we come across to implementing some of our programs. So Grid Alternatives, we're a nonprofit. I think the original founders, they started in 2001 with this idea of how can we, use this technology to benefit, communities or people that normally wouldn't have access to this. They came up with different ideas, and in 2004, they installed their first no-cost solar system in San Francisco. A little shortly after that, they started, finding different models of how to fund these programs. I think a big component of Grid's initial push was just trying to use technology. I think sometimes that's what happens in the energy field, is there's a lot of technology, but sometimes it's not accessible to the communities that we serve, right? Especially, people of color, communities that are at a disadvantage. Next slide, please. So like we were saying, so we're, as long as we're also a nonprofit, we're also a contractor. So we actually install some of the solar panels ourselves. I always kind of like, I have to put on multiple different hats. Sometimes I'm a caseworker trying to get people through the process. Sometimes I'm like a construction person trying to figure out what things need to happen. A lot of our funds, and this is probably a big topic of the environmental justice, is, how are we funded? A lot of our funds come from each other, from ratepayer, from our own taxes, the State Cap and Trade Fund, the California Energy Fund. We partner with different cities and municipal governments, including San Francisco, Richmond, a couple of the community aggregate choice, and also, companies like Sunrun that make this possible. Next slide, please. So one of our biggest programs, and I think the one that I could probably speak to the most, is our Energy for All program. So this is our single family solar program. We do have other programs that are, kind of now that relate to clean mobility, where, we're trying to make an impact on the clean mobility side, the EV infrastructure, all those are all going. We have a component for multifamily, again, trying to make sure that we're not just serving homeowners, but also people that, don't have a chance to buy a home. And also we have a lot of other tribal programs, international programs. But the one that I probably will speak the most on is our single family Energy for All program. So there's 3 components that we always try to hit is people. We try to always serve people that are, income qualified, or again, normally wouldn't have access to this technology. We work in the clean specs, in the clean energy sector. So we focus on, electric, making sure that we're helping the planet. And another component to ours is making sure that we also do hands-on training for people that want to learn these skills, not, again, like the each one teach one, the more you know, the more you owe, kind of those particular models. It's kind of been slowed down lately because of COVID, but that's something that we also really try to push. Next slide. So this next slide, this is just a quick little recap. Since 2007, this is how many systems we've installed in the Bay Area. Grid also works outside of the Bay Area. And those aren't highlighted, but I just wanted a quick snapshot. Next slide. For people that may or may not know, I'll do a little quick thing on Grid Solar. Again, power comes from the sun, it goes into the panels, and before it can be usable energy, for the most part, there's like a little inverter, and that kind of switches it to energy that your house can use. And this is what we tend to this is when they say that the meter is running backwards, right? If your solar system is producing more than what you're using, you can actually see the little meter running backwards, and you get credit. We mainly work in grid type systems, saying that, there's not like a way to island yourself from the grid, or, in this case, PG. Next slide, please. A program, again, we're always trying to focus on accessibility. A lot of our messages, unfortunately, are very, very similar to the for-profit scamming solar industry. Ours is no cost, but the only difference is, we don't require any credits. We don't, collect socials. There's definitely not a payment to our programs. There's no liens to the house. There's no hidden costs, other than just like, in the long term, if some equipment is out of warranty, but there's no like surprises. Next slide. I feel like this is to talk about environmental justice. A lot of our money that we do get, it has to be in certain areas. Maybe we could try opening the map, the little state funded area. map. Can you hit that side? I don't know if it'll work. Yes, I don't know what happened. Maybe we won't try it. Let's see. So yeah, so there's this map that it's a state, you know, map that basically any census tract that has 25%, or they give you a score from 0 to 100. The closer you are to 100, the higher that, you know, your census tract is considered at a disadvantage. And they use 23 different indicators, but a majority of it probably is pollution, income, and race, along with other things. So whenever you create those kinds of boundaries, you're kind of already creating some kind of inequalities, just because, you know, these maps sometimes are not dynamic, or they don't reflect the communities that we serve all the time. But again, these are just things that are kind of above us, but I just wanted to share that. You can probably go to, yeah. And then also another thing is just the cost of the program, right? Who qualifies for the program. Again, I think we're always trying to help as many people as we can. But sometimes like these qualifications from the state don't always reflect. We have a big issue in our area, because a lot of these qualifications, they're maybe a little bit more reasonable in places like the Central Valley, or places that are a little bit more, you know, rural. But in our community, because of the high cost of living, it's really hard to actually get people these technologies. So that, you know, even though it sounds great and awesome, there's a lot of like little barriers that you have to actually meet to go through the program. Next slide. I'm just putting it out there, so if you know anybody, let me know. Yeah, it's hard for us to find the program, and there's a $200 referral. Next program, or next slide, sorry. I had to put it in there. Okay, and again, along with the other qualifications, some of the other things that we really encounter, like barriers, and I think, again, just trying to think of like what is environmental justice, but just not being able to serve the people that, you know, this program is designated to serve. There's a lot of other barriers that sometimes aren't thought about, but again, just being a homeowner in the Bay Area, I think that's one of the biggest barriers that we have is, even though we think about like environmental justice, like it's much more than just like what we typically think of, like the environment, right? But just like how can we live and thrive in our communities? And of course, being a homeowner, it creates a lot of, you know, displacements, and, you know, gentrification has been awful in the Bay Area. So that definitely creates some problems. Sometimes they're just, you know, code issues with the families that we work in. Again, definitely, we're not like the police or anything. We're not trying to, like, you know, make you fix your own things. But we know how it is, you know, sometimes, you know, we encounter families that have people living in their living room or in their garage, or they build a structure, again, trying to alleviate some of the income and stuff. But sometimes that creates challenges for us. Sometimes systems are too small, right? They're not going to get like a great benefit from this. But these are all things that kind of come up. Sometimes even having bad roofs, that's something that, if anything, we've been it's like a highlight in the time that I've been with Grid. We were able to pilot a program with the San Francisco and the city of Richmond, where we can replace people's roofs so they can get the solar. So not only do they, you know, get a brand new roof, which is really good, but they also can start benefiting from the solar. And then, yeah, just to cap and trade, just to highlight that, taking it to the big picture is, you know, whenever we do this stuff, like, is it actually taking the pollution out, right? Again, I don't think that's something that we talk about that much as, like, you know, an organization or as an industry. Are we actually doing anything to clean up the air, to clean up these communities, besides just putting on the solar panels? That's another one. Next slide. And again, I just wanted to highlight other people that are doing amazing work besides the panelists that I'm you know, here with. But the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, they do awesome work, so check them out. I think I linked it. Poder in San Francisco, they also do awesome work. The Asian Pacific Environmental Network, that's another organization that also does amazing work. And that's the next slide. I think that's my last slide. And yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. I mean, again, I think we could talk about environmental justice and energy for forever, basically. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Finally, we've got Jessie Clements. from the Berkeley Student Food Collective. Let me go ahead and get your slides up here.
Cool. Thanks, Sai. Thanks everyone for coming out here. I'm excited. Cool. So yeah, as Sai said, my name is Jessie Clements. I'm from the Berkeley Student Food Collective. I'm the chair of the board of the Berkeley Student Food Collective, and I'm also a Berkeley student. I'm a junior studying rhetoric, so not particularly related to this work. But yeah, so what we are is that we are a student-run, democratically governed nonprofit grocery store in Berkeley. Which is kind of a mouthful, and it often is kind of hard to explain exactly what we do because we also take on a couple different roles. Can I have the next slide? So we operate a grocery store, but we're also an educational nonprofit, and especially during COVID, we've kind of been navigating what that means to not operate a grocery store right now, and how we can kind of continue our work remotely, but we usually do both. Can I have the next slide? So we were born out of student protests in 2008 when the UC Berkeley campus was proposing to build a Panda Express on campus. And then in true Berkeley fashion, students really protested this move and the lack of healthy student options that are available near the Berkeley campus, because there is a real absence of affordable and fresh options that are accessible to students. And students felt that having a Panda Express didn't address any of those, and also that there was no student voice in that process. There really aren't a lot of places near the UC Berkeley campus to get groceries, and the ones that are available, food options, are really not affordable to students. We know that about 39% of students across UC Berkeley experience food insecurity, so it's a very real concern that students aren't able to get affordable food options in a way that is just or has any kind of the values that they wanted to see in that food system. So in 2009, students started with a stand on Sproul Plaza. Unfortunately, my image there is really blurry, so you can just imagine. And they were biking in produce from Oakland in a kind of a farmer's market style that was selling produce at cost to students. And then in 2010, with a $90,000 grant from the Green Initiative Fund, we moved to our current storefront premise on Bancroft. So shout out CIRC, because that was hugely instrumental in getting us to be where we are. Next slide. So that's our storefront when we opened in 2010. Since then, our mission has been to deliver healthy, sustainable food and affordable choices within walking distance of the Berkeley campus, and also to give students some ownership in the food system. So besides our executive director, we're almost entirely run by student volunteers, both in the storefront and on our board of directors. We're a co-op, so that means that we're democratically governed by students who are voting members and also elected to our board. Students also join committees and take on kind of all the other work that we do. So community outreach, deciding which kind of products to sell, creating member education workshops, hosting events, and etc. Next slide. And also being largely staffed by student volunteers means that we sell organic and local produce at cost. And so we can also support minority and marginalized businesses and farms and other businesses that really want to spotlight that might otherwise be really expensive for student budgets. But we're able to subsidize that by having volunteer labor in the storefront. Next slide. We also have piloted a lot of accessibility programs. So we accept California EBT and have double value on that for California produce, which is everything in our store. And we've also piloted this really exciting house-made pay what you want sliding scale meal program. So we take produce that we're no longer able to sell in our storefront, and then in the back kitchen, student volunteers will make homemade meals out of them, which we sell on a sliding scale from $1 to $5. So people can come in, get a hot meal and only pay $1 for it, or pay $5 and subsidize someone else's meal, which is a pretty exciting program for Berkeley because there's just nothing else like that around. And we've been trying to expand that by also getting produce from the Cal Dining and kind of making that a bigger part of what we do. Our motto has always been that we're more than a grocery store. And then when the COVID pandemic hit, that was really put to the test. So in March of last year, we closed our doors and tried to figure out how we could serve the community remotely and what that meant to us, what were our assets as an organization, and how we could kind of leverage them. How would we uphold our mission without directly providing food? So we started doing our own self-education, primarily about organizing. So we were born from student organizing and direct action. So looking to that as a way to kind of keep working on change. We started a book club using mostly Jane McAlvey from the UC Berkeley Labor Center's book, No Shortcuts, which is like a manual for how to get involved in direct organizing, and starting to just educate ourselves and reorganize our model around getting our membership kind of an introduction to how to be an effective organizer. Next slide. So in the past year, we've been working on that as we've been closed. We have a radical reading club that's based on kind of creating this member education. We've had a lot of fundraisers for other great organizations in the Bay, like the East Oakland Grocery Co-op and Farms to Grow Inc., where we were able to donate over $2,000 to those organizations. We've just been pulling from our networks, having text banks on People's Park and other kind of ongoing campaigns in Berkeley. So working to terminate the pouring rights contract with PepsiCo in the fall and other just ongoing justice projects around. And so just really using our kind of organizational model to support things that are already going on instead of using our membership to actually run the grocery store. And now we're going to be actually reopening in the fall. Very exciting. So we're also really excited about that, to also use this as an opportunity to kind of revamp our store and go back to operating that again in the fall. Yeah, so that's all from me, actually. Thanks, I'm all set.
Thank you, Jessie. All right, well, thank you all to our wonderful panelists for introducing themselves, telling us a little bit about the work you all are doing. What I would really love to do with the time remaining is just to sort of get a conversation going. Just for our audience who's coming from a variety of perspectives, a variety of backgrounds in environmental justice, I think it'd be great to kind of summarize in a sentence or two for each of you what environmental justice means uniquely to you and or your organization. And I will let you all popcorn style it. Whoever wants to jump in, please go ahead.
Okay, ask me again, Sai.
Sure. So our question is, in a sentence or two, what does environmental justice mean uniquely to you and or your organization?
Environmental justice means everybody has the same opportunity to live at one with the environment, to have a voice in, and even a commitment to having a positive impact on that environment, and the education to understand why. I think it's really important as we all go forward. For me, justice in anything is a two-way street. I like the mutual aid and the give and take that we are learning to develop among each other as a culture. And I think an even give and take, or give and receive, I like that better, is a good thing in whatever frame you choose to place that.
I can go next. I mean, I'd like to note that I really loved your answer, Wanda, and I'm a really large fan of the work you do over at Hoover. A lot of students talk about it run
Well,
around.
and I have to thank you all because your organization played a major role in the development of the Hoover Garden. And anybody from CERC has bragging rights and the free opportunity to come get collard greens. We have a lot.
Okay, well, I'm gonna email you for that coming up really soon. But yeah, I suppose as a individual person, environmental justice to myself means asking the questions why and who when thinking about climate change and the impacts of climate change on human systems. Asking why there is this growing need for advocacy in so many different sectors in terms of like energy, renewable energy, food justice. How does that tie to social advocacy campaigns, and who has and who will be the most impacted by these growing negative consequences of climate change. And I think that almost directly aligns with what CERC, how CERC as an organization feels about environmental justice, just asking why are these conditions being created, who's being most impacted, and how can we help within this moment in any way that we can. So that would be my answer to that.
I guess I can go next. I think for us being a co-op, a lot of what we think of as environmental justice is about agency, because unlike kind of standard practices of capitalism, co-ops by definition build justice into their operating frameworks. Democratic member control, concern for community, cooperation among other co-ops, those are all standard principles of what it means to be a co-op. And so they build in agency in your food system or whatever kind of co-op it is, and like community control. And I think justice is about primarily, community voice and community participation in the future that they want. So for us, building a space that kind of respects that and is governed by the community it serves and is responsive to those needs, and just giving people a space that has their agency in it is really important. Especially for students who are, inheriting a lot of baggage of the future also, but really for anyone.
Yeah, I feel like everybody's comments pretty much capture everything. For us, it's and me personally, it's just all about trying to live a life free from these burdens, right? Like, how can we create this? Like, so there isn't any like bad air, right? So there isn't any like poverty. So there isn't any these other things, because everything's pretty much interconnected. Like there isn't like a hard line where something stops. And for the work that I do, a lot of it really is just access information, education. Definitely, like I think somebody mentioned it, just two ways. Not only can we educate, but also have the community educate us on like what kinds of things they need and bringing it up to the front. That's the only thing that I can add.
Thank you all. Well, one other thing we wanted to focus on, and not to focus on the problems, but I think it's where sometimes it starts. Second question we have for you is, what do you see as the root causes of injustice and inequity in your field?
Exclusivity. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you go. You take that one. Ooh.
Oh, I was just going to say one word: exclusivity. The idea that in environmental justice work, you can't exclude certain groups of people from participating, because that just negates the entire point of working in environmental justice in the first place. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. And I know Wanda wanted to say something, so I'll pass it over.
I mean, and I think I'd have to simply say racism, right? And I'm not one who is quick to throw the R word around. I think, nobody wants to be called a racism. Nobody wants to be guilty of being a racist. But I think, because you said the root of it, I think we have to identify that as a big part of the issue. And I think that racism and the history in this country of stolen land and stolen labor and stolen people has set us all up and pitted us all against one another. And until we deal with that and deal with the pain that all of us suffer, you know, including the evil white man who started it all, until we deal with all the pain that we all have, I think we're not going anywhere. And so you asked about the root, that's what I'd say.
Jessie or Ron, do either of you want to weigh in?
I mean, I just want to really echo what Wanda said. I think I was going to say like land access, which you can't separate that from racism in this country. But I think that's a huge part of it when we talk about food justice, like who has access to land, who has access to food. Obviously, affordable food is super tied to that. And you can't separate that from the history of injustice in this country and land seizures from Indigenous communities, from communities of color. So yeah, I'm sure Wanda can speak much more eloquently about that than I can, but similarly, yeah.
So maybe that leads us into, I don't know, the flip side of that. And I heard, a few of you really kind of speak to this. But our final question is, what do you think we need to do today or continue to do today to continue to move towards a more environmentally just future? I want to highlight that I've heard a few commonalities already between the four of you, one of which being this sort of communal nature, this mutual nature of the work, and this other thing being of healing. And so if you all want to expand on that, what do we need to do? What do we need to do today, whether that's as individuals or collectively?
My perspective is that of a permaculturalist. And one of the principles in permaculture is about stacking function, where you achieve many things, many goals by doing a single act. And it's not even really especially romantic. It's actually very common sense, right? Let's get the most done with the least work and effort, or at least the most effective work. And I know that in gardens, you can grow plants, people, and the planet all at the same time, right? You can teach a child not just how to grow a seed and have beans, you can teach them how to grow themselves, right? The same conversation about what a seed and a seedling needs to thrive and grow, right? And cycle through its life isn't a whole lot different than a human. And when you're building an ecosystem of a garden and you're doing it with a group of people, you also build in the features that support community, particularly across culture, right? Because food is the one thing that binds all of us together. And when you get everybody talking about the food that is special to them and sharing it with one another, it builds bridges, it builds relationships, right? It builds understanding. And then when you're doing the act of stewarding any land and you're taking care of the nature and the wildlife there, and you're adding compost to the soil, and you're consciously planting trees for carbon, sorry, now I've been talking too much today. In the reclamation of carbon, you're getting it all done, right? And everything we need. I have really watched, while there's a lot of food in the Hoover Garden, my favorite thing about that garden are the people and how the people are coming to know and love one another. I mean, I think if you said in one word, what do we need to do? I'd say love, right? And so being out on the land, outside where it is safe, with all the positive hormones that flow when you dig in soil, with nourishing human bodies in a way in which they thrive, I think I don't know that it is the answer, but I know that it is what is necessary for the beginning, And so in all this pandemic stuff, what I've held tight to in terms of my faith is that, yup, patriarchy and capitalism and all of those things are crumbling to pieces. And I personally don't even need to help that happen. I don't even think almost anybody does, right? Sandcastles, once they start dissolving, they dissolve. And so I've chosen to focus my actions and my intentions on building the world for tomorrow, after this transition is over, right? So building the skills to be able to land in all the tumult and sort of drop and roll and then get up. And the one thing I know is that we're all going to need to eat, right? So planting gardens and doing it together, again, stacking functions, saving the planet so there's something left of it after we're done with the social unrest, right? I think it's all I know to do. And it's kept me from not going crazy in the last year.
Thank you, Wanda.
You're welcome. What do the rest of y'all think? You're looking at me, or at least it looks like you're just looking at me.
I want to note that was such a beautiful, perfect answer. I don't think any of us want to really follow that. At least I don't want to speak for Jessie.
That's called the practice of doing 57 Zoom presentations in a week.
Wow. I didn't even know that was possible.
Yeah, I didn't do 57. That's a big, but it's been a lot.
Yeah.
Not to mention the 61 years.
Gabby, something I was really drawn to in what you were saying was the story about the hummingbird, because I think it really spoke to something for me that I struggle with when, I look at the enormity, sometimes overwhelming complexity of some of these problems of what an individual really can do, and it can be discouraging. And I don't know, that story really spoke to me. I don't know if I don't remember where you said that came from.
I will link the original quote that we pulled from, as well as the film that you can find it featured in. But yeah, just to reiterate, the story of the hummingbird is really just the basis of a lot of our values at CERC and how we really try to go about perceiving impact as we continue this ongoing student-led environmental advocacy in so many different spheres of the sustainability movement. So yeah, I'll link it down below, but just want to leave it with that.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to each of our panelists. Again, we've got Jessie Clements, Gabby Ambayak, Juan Bernal, and Wanda Stewart. You all have been great. I know we're kind of running up against time. We do have a couple minutes if there's any questions from the audience. Otherwise, I do encourage, to the degree that you feel comfortable, if you all want to put your email in the chat in case anyone has questions. Otherwise, I'll put my email there, and anyone from our audience, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I can pass along any questions.
While we're waiting, I just got to shout out Dante Gonzalez, who just jumped in here. And Dante is the first person that came to me and started offering up stuff and just never stopped giving. And I just love him and thank him. And Dante, you would not believe what that garden looks like now. It's remarkable. I'll have to send pictures. But thank you for all you did and all those folks you bought. When you have a school garden, what do you want? A whole bunch of college guys to show up. Like the football team shows up and they do wheelbarrows and it's on.
I'm hoping to come up within this next month. Was also talking to Kumu Kawe and Kumu Renee about having AHA up there as well too. So hoping to definitely see that garden soon.
Great, thank you all.
And y'all, relationships, right? Relationships in the garden. It doesn't even matter what you grow. right? Just being out there. I need some solar though, Juan. Okay.
All right, thank you all. You're welcome to stay on if you'd like, ask any more questions. But everybody, thanks again. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to our participants here today. We do at StopWaste have a couple more events. So just keep your eye out, and I'll actually link it in the chat in case you're interested. Tomorrow we have a Saturday Drive Clean in case you're interested in learning a little bit more about electric vehicles. And then Monday we have a session on resilient homes. So the sign up links are in the chat in case you're interested. And once again, thank you all. Thank you all of our wonderful panelists today.
Thank
Hey,
you.
great.
Thank you, Sai, and thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Simon.